Okay, so hi everyone, this is the third video in this tutorial series, and we're going to cover neuroanatomy and neurophysiology of sensory and motor functions. Last lesson we looked at the chemistry and all the molecules and organelles of neural cells, and essentially also action potentials. That's the key point I wanted you to get from this video. And now we're going to look at how essentially we have bigger networks, so for example bigger networks of neurons that make up the nervous system essentially that allows the nervous system to do useful things, to function, and essentially for survival and reproduction. Also, just some notes, please watch the video, like and share and comment and subscribe if you want more of this content. That's the best way for me to know that you want more, and it will motivate me to do more. I do spend a lot of time on these, making these videos, so yeah. And please leave comments, if you've got any questions, any mistakes you spotted, or just general feedback, any type of comment, please let me know. In the description there's a link to the PowerPoint of this video, of these the PowerPoint that you can download and print out and read in more detail in your own time. And there's more about me, references as well, in full references and so on. So neural networks, biological networks of neurons. We have neurons, they can be interconnected in many ways. There's hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of combinations, and just a few neurons, just for like a dozen, maybe 2 dozen neurons, you have maybe 50 100 connections. I mean, that already gets pretty complicated. And as I said before, we have 100 billion neurons interconnected by 100 trillion synapses. So it gets complicated. And in I think section 6, maybe in section 4, 5 and 6 and onwards, we'll look at these neural networks in more detail. Biological neural networks and artificial neural networks. This is the visual system, Fellman and Van Essen, which if you study final year, I think if you're an undergrad student, you don't have to know this at A-level or the SATs, but if you study visual neuroscience in your third year at university, I mean certainly I did, and you have to know all the connections there, okay? And actually, if you know between the LGN and V1 and V3 and the STP areas, the LIP, LIP, you have to know the connections. And knowing all the connections actually helps you understand how in that case, how the visual system works, or how any organ widespread system works. And in section 6, we'll talk a lot more about that. Okay, so yes, we start with the basics here. We talked about the brain, a lot of neurons, and a lot of connections. And what we're going to talk about now, I guess, is, okay, so what we have is the brain. We have the main divisions of the brain. We have, central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, which are all the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. Central nervous system is brain and spinal cord. And we have the sensory components, and we have the motor components. And the brain is very complicated. You have to understand that the sensory components and the motor components are intrinsically related. I mean, it's very hard you can't dissociate them, obviously. We have compartmentalization in the nervous system, as shown here. But we'll see that you kind of have to understand the whole picture to understand any given components, okay? And similarly, vice versa, you have to understand each component to understand the whole system as a whole. Actually, I have something to show you. This guy here. There you go, let me show you this, which is a brain. So this is the skull. Let me show you, which is just a mask, but anyway. Remove the skull, you have the brain. Let me get a good angle on this. Let's see, let's put it here. No, there you go. So this here is a brain. This is just a model of the brain, and what you have to know, I think, for this video is just, it has, so here we have essentially, this is the front part, this is the back part, and is the lighting good? Yes, there you go. You have to know, we'll go through it now, but this is the cerebral cortex, and it's responsible for a lot of different functions, as you will see, in thinking, in processing sensory and motor information. And we have the cerebellum here. That's the frontal part. There you go. This is underneath. When you look, this is my brain here. Then we can see, the brainstem and the cerebellum, the two hemispheres which split like this. Look at this. I'm sorry, this would be the let me try and yes, so I'm sorry, this would be the right hemisphere, this is the left. When you look on the inside, of course, let's look at that one. So these are all the different components which you have to know. We'll cover these in this video. The frontal cortex, we have the occipital lobe, we have the parietal lobe right here. And then the main part of the midbrain, the limbic system, which we'll talk about. And I'll actually show you I'll show you. By the way, if you want this, I'll put a link if you want to buy it. I'll go down Amazon. It's kind of helpful. It's foam. You can like squeeze it and but I'll show you the actual diagrams, which I think is a lot better. So here we have the cerebrum, parietal lobe, frontal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, visual perception. Please download the PowerPoint, and then you can print that out, put it on your wall or something. I don't know, but you should know all these areas and what they're involved in. You should know cerebellum, the brainstem, cerebellum, posture, motor learning, brainstem, breathing, reflexes, control. The thalamus, which is a sensory relay, the cortex, and there's the cortico-thalamic tracts, which you have to know about, not for A-level. If you do first year neuroscience, you will have to know about these. Hypothalamus, it's important for autonomic behavioral patterns. It works closely with the endocrine system. Limbic system will cover more in section 5, the fifth video, which will be on cognitive and behavioral neuroscience. We'll look at the limbic system in more detail. We'll look at the hippocampus and the amygdala. Hippocampus especially, that's what I specialize in. And it's involved in memory, episodic memory, visual spatial learning, short-term episodic information. We have spatial navigation, also imagination as well. And there's been recent work on that by that guy, Demis Hassabis, Ellen Maguire, UCL. We'll cover this more in actually section 5 on cognitive neuroscience, and then section 6 on computational neuroscience. And the sensory cortex you have to know about, and also how it's interconnected with the frontal cortex, the prefrontal areas, and also the motor areas, which are involved in volition, in wanting to do moves, in planning and deciding to do moves based on sensory information, planning and decision, wanting the motivation for moves, and sending out motor commands to initiate movements and executing them. Okay, this you have to know for university. At A-level, well, you should know the motor cortex, I think, and the basal ganglia, subcortical regions involved in the control and the controlling movements. There's an additional level of control and also the stopping movements that are executed. Yes, that's it for that. And I did that for my project for university like 2 years ago. It is just a rendition using the excellent piece of software, the 3D Allen Brain Atlas of the human brain. It's fantastic, and because I worked on the hippocampus, that's why it's highlighted there. But it's great. Go on the links. The Allen Institute do incredible work in neuroscience, and you can donate to them. You can just check out the website. They do incredible work. Definitely check it out. The software is incredible, and it's very useful. If you're learning, you're studying the brain, you can rotate I'll do a separate video on this, just to show you different types of software that you can get on the internet for education and research purposes. I'll do a separate video actually, because they're all very helpful. Anyway, now what we'll look at is just core neurobiology and sensory systems. So here we have the general senses. We have touch and nociception, pain, thermoreception, heat, temperature changes, chemoreception, proprioception, and so on. It's the general senses of touch and pressure and vibration and pain and temperature. We also have special senses, 5 special senses. We have vision, sight, audition, hearing. We have equilibrium, balance, that's regulated by the vestibular apparatus, canals, and the inner ear, and also stretch organs in the muscle joints. Look that up as well. This is proprioception. I'm sorry. Yes, proprioception, gustation, taste, and that's chemoreception, and also olfaction, smell. And I mean, we can talk about all of this forever, but we don't have much time in this video. That's why I'm going to focus on only vision, because for various reasons. One, it is the system, I think, which is, I believe, it's the most studied. It's been studied for over 100 years now. We have a very good understanding of how it works. A lot of what we know about sensory systems and computational science is derived, computational neuroscience, sorry, is derived from looking at the visual system and how it works. And it's highly studied. We have a lot of experiments in the visual system. And we also, it's the one that I know most about, because I studied it in my 3rd year as part of my final year project. So I know more about visual neuroscience, and you know, whichever sensory system you look at, this is the basic scheme, the basic schema of sensory systems. You have a receptor molecule, receptor cells, then you have the nerves that carry the information, the action potentials, and it's related to the brain areas, and it's processed there and integrated there in the brain. That's the gist of sensory systems. And just to say that if you study at university and you study molecular biology, especially in your 2nd and 3rd year, you will have to know about the G protein coupled receptors and messengers. It's absolutely fundamental in molecular neuroscience and the foundation of sensory systems. You don't need to know that for A level. All you have to know is receptor molecules, nerve endings, cells, nerves, transmits, area to be integrated in the association areas of the brain, in the perception areas and the association and integration areas of the brain. I'm not going to the ear, you can I won't go into this, as I said. So we'll just look at the visual system. This is a very important point I want you to get from that video, which is that the diseases of anything, any part of the brain, for example, the visual system, helps us understand how it works. So it's kind of healthy physiology. So we look at disease of the brain, of the visual system, for example, of the eye or the brain. And obviously that helps us in medicine, because we can make a clinical diagnosis and treatment. But also we have to we use that for research, and we can use these conditions, we can study them, and we can do research to help us understand how the visual system works in terms of its normal physiology. Okay, a lot of what is done, a lot of what we know about the brain, for example, and sensory systems and motor systems, is based on studying conditions and disorders, like diseases. So for example, myopia, conjunctivitis, retinitis, macular degeneration, blindness, abnormalities, from this we know about the nervous system, we know about the visual nervous system. And of course, the research helps us to develop treatments and cures. So it's, again, interdisciplinary neuroscience and applied neuroscience here. The visual system is the eyes and the visual parts of the brain. So the eyes are part of the visual system. It receives you have the visual field, you have the light that hits the photoreceptors, that goes through the lens and the various layers, hits the retinal photoreceptors. Then the impulses are transmitted to the optic nerve, and we have the LGN, we have the primary visual cortex at the back. This is my brain again that I showed you. There you go. So just the back part of the brain, because yes, and then it is relayed through different pathways to the frontal part of the brain, and that's the way it's integrated with motor information and also with planning and decision information. And we'll talk more about this. These are some Nobel Prize winner, Huber and Wiesel, classic experiments here, you have to know that, and other people. Okay, so we have an image, we have a three-dimensional world with color, with features, with shapes, and with depth, with lots of things. And the image is focused on the fovea, and you sample essentially. This is a photo. This is essentially what you see. A certain area of your whole visual field. What you focus on with high resolution is a specific part of the landscape. That's what you see in high resolution. Now, when you sample, as you're doing right now, my microphone is. As you sample different areas of the landscape, you essentially construct the image, and so that's why you see you construct a clear image of the whole landscape through integrating all the different high resolution samples. And we can, what we do here is, so for example, color coding, we go all the way back to photoreceptors. Like in LCD screens, I think we have red, green, blue pixels, or these are not output cells, they're input, they detect light. So just very briefly, depending on these are sensitive to different wavelengths of light, and you have light that right now you have light from the sun or your artificial lights that bounce off materials, and they're emitted into your eye. The photons hit the photoreceptors, and depending on the RGB different colors here, photoreceptors will be sensitive to different wavelengths of light. And so the blue photoreceptors, for example, if you shine red light or any type of light on the blue photoreceptors, and you only have blue photoreceptors, you can only see blue. Even though it's white light or different other. Let me think about this. Yes, so you can only see blue with blue photoreceptors, and it's the combination of how the different RGB cells are stimulated that essentially we can then combine the information in the brain, and in the different parts of the brain we can combine that information to it's done in the retina and in the optic nerve and in the different LGN and the primary visual cortex and in other extrastriate areas. We can combine the information to make sense of color. It's based on the combination of the signals from these three different types of cells, or four in that case, of rods. So yeah, that's an important concept to understand. Okay, so that's what I'm going to say for color coding. I don't want to... That's all you need to know, really, for A-level, for example. You might need to know about bipolar cells and... yeah. So we have a chromatic vision, but we want shapes. We want patches of light and dark and contrast and shapes and features, right? We want the structure, the color has to feel shapes or be part of lines and shapes in the landscape, in your visual field. So what you have essentially is, as I say, you start at the retina, then you move on to the optic nerve, then the LGN, the V1 area or primary visual cortex. It's also called the striate cortex. I think it depends on if you're experimenting in humans or other apes, I don't know. But then you have other higher areas that process the following. So we have dots and horizontal lines and lines, dots and lines, as you can see here. Then we can combine lines together to make curves. We can actually, well, we have edge detection, which is how we detect light, as shown here. We have edge detection based on the difference in light intensities. That's using opponency in cells. But you detect edges, you detect curves, you detect dots. You can see how you can combine information from that area of the brain that processes lines and curves and simple shapes, and then you can make more complex shapes. There's rectangles and circles and a smiley face and a star. You can combine features, combine lines and curves to make objects and just more complex objects and shapes. Eventually you have the kind of complexity that you see right now. For, face detection, complex visual features, any visual features that you're looking at right now, that is all orchestrated by the gradual increase in complexity of these structures and how they process information. You have an image, it hits the retina, forms an image on the retina, it's deconstructed into all its different features, into horizontal lines, into vertical lines, diagonal lines. You have contrast changes, you have colors, I've said, and from these individual components it reconstructs the whole image. Okay, it's integrated spatially and temporally for also movement as well. That is something else. It's not just a static image. We need a system by which we need algorithms that can actually compare a static image, a frame, an object in a frame with. We need to compare different frames, different static frames, different object positions over time to create a sense of that there's movement there. Okay, and some people unfortunately can see, of course, but they have no really bad capacity for detecting movement, which they might get run over by a car or something like that. I don't know what the condition is called. Anyway, so here what we have is I think I showed that diagram to you in the first video, section 1, and so here this is a simple diagram which pretty much summarizes neuroscience. We have the sensory information that I've just discussed, not just from the visual system, from any sensory system that's integrated in the brain. We have sensory motor integration and cognitive functions, which we'll look at in section 5. But for this video it's just going to be sensory and motor, and essentially motor is intrinsically related to sensory information in the sense that motor systems process sensory information, but also as you move, for example, as you behave, there's sensory feedback there. You move your arm, if you move your hand or your arms, there is proprioceptive and tactile feedback. There's also visual feedback as you move, right? So it's very hard. You can dissociate the sensory and motor systems, but it's just, as a neuroscientist, again, the emphasis there that is probably not emphasized at school, but certainly at university, you have. My mic is falling off for some reason. The microphone. There you go. So I hope you can hear this properly. But at university, you have to know how these functions are integrated, and that's it pretty much. So now we'll look at some motor physiology, which is movement. Movement is simply, or behavior, is a series of muscle contractions, and we have cardiac muscles, we have the smooth muscles and intestinal organs. What we'll look at is the skeletal muscles. That's what we're interested in. That's what I'll cover. That's how we move. We move with arms, legs, and our head, or facial expression, the dexterity, the lips, the vocalization of speech, and the tongue, the lip movement, and so on, and the facial expression. And the dexterity of the hand. I mean, that is highly studied in motor neuroscience. And again, it's controlled. We have many muscles in the hand and the face, and it's controlled by the brain. I'm not going to cover the physiology of muscles. I'll talk about the neural control of muscles. Neuroscience. So we have many experiments in electrophysiology on this. You can read more about these, Google these terms here. And as I've said previously in this video and in previous videos, yes, we'll look at the different parts of the brain that are responsible, in that case, for motor commands. We have the frontal cortical areas and the premotor, the primary somatomotor area. And at that, here what we have is the planning of movements based on sensory feedback and cognitive processes. And then you have and then you have the motor commands, which are sent to actually execute the planned actions. And we'll see actually that the planned actions, because there's constant feedback, and when you send the program, when you send the command for an action, it doesn't always end up to be the action you've sent the command for, and there needs to be constant feedback to correct for the discrepancies. It can get pretty complicated, but for A level, I mean, that's that's the gist of it. So different parts of the spinal cord are responsible. Higher vertebrae, we control upper limbs, and then you can see the legs, that would be the lower parts of the spinal cord, which makes sense, right? As I said before, one thing that's highly studied is the dexterity of the hand and muscle fingers. And here in the diagram you see, it shows the brain areas. You can see the sensory and the frontal information that's integrated in the motor systems in the cerebral cortex and in the brainstem. Cerebellum is very important as well in posture, and also I think in learning, like things like walking, writing, things you don't really think about, right? You're not consciously aware of them unless you intentionally think about these things. Here we have some people which you should know, born people. Sherrington, who's a classic guy, did work on it. Kandel, Frith, Schwartz, and the Blakemore, Hagar, Rothwell, Mason, Lemon. Lots of people at University College London, where I went. UCL is a fantastic university in terms of its research, especially in neuroscience. And there's been work in the past 10 years or so there's been a lot of breakthrough work, and I definitely recommend go on the UCL website, look at the research there. It's pretty great. If you have a question on the UCL science, like applying to degrees, just comment in the description comment in the comment section, and I'll try and reply if I can. I should be able to. Okay, so we looked at this before. Input, process, output. That's the nervous system in a nutshell. And there's feedback loops and kind of self, in the process. It's very complicated when you look at processes, as we've seen already. Sensory motor integration, there you go, is what we're interested in. So we looked at sensory system, we looked at the motor system in very briefly. And what you need to know is that this is the sensory and motor homunculus, I think that's what it's called, in the cortex. And you can see on the left here and on the right that certain parts of the brain, certain parts of the body are overrepresented compared to other parts. Look, you can see the face and the lips and the face and the head, facial expression in terms of sensation to the face and lips and mouth, and also the expression, the muscle contractions in the face and lips. We have the hand and the fingers, These areas, the face and the hands, are highly, as you can see, highly overrepresented, both in the sensory cortex and the motor cortex. That's not a coincidence. Okay, again, the main thing I want to communicate to you is the sensory and motor systems are intrinsically interrelated and are based on receptors in the skin, or receptors, sensory receptors, and muscle effectors. And all of this is essentially based on how the brain is based on neural control, and it's based on the algorithms in the brain that integrates all the sensory information and then controls all the motor outputs. In section 6, in the 6th video I'll talk more about the computations and systems neuroscience, because for now that's all you need to know. I mean, I think we've covered in enough depth for A-level or first year university. If you're in a university, you'll have to know a bit more detail than that. You'll have to know the experiments of how we know all this. If you're writing essays on neuroscience, I won't go through this. That's pretty much it. You know, this is. I was just going to say about the way that, for example, when you catch a ball, when you grab a ball, there's the visual and motor information that's integrated. Pretty much anything that you do, any behavior that I can think of, is based on. What I'm trying to say is, this right here, to understand sensory and motor functions, both sensory and motor functions, you have to know how they work together. That's it. You just have to. And I've covered this very briefly in this video. And you can, look up more details. I've got references at the end here I can show you, but that's all I'm going to say on this video, I think. And so, again, that video is not just about interdisciplinary neuroscience. It's also about the applied principles of neuroscience. So we have prosthetics, which are we've had for a long time, but which are not really functional. But we have functional prosthetics, like bionics. These are electromechanical, for example, artificial eyes that we're developing to replace sensory organs, and that's pretty incredible. These are very recent. I mean, in the past 10, 20 years, and in the past 2 years or so, and in the next few years there'll be really exciting developments. This is why this today is one of the best times to get into neuroscience, because it's specifically interdisciplinary and applied neuroscience, because there's a lot of interesting things happening in medicine and in engineering. So that's the kind of things that I'm interested in, and I hope that you are too. But yes, bionics, we have brain-machine interfaces, we have robot limbs, mechanical limbs. We can connect the wires to the biological nervous system and nerves. It's controlled by the mind. Okay, robot limbs. So that's pretty interesting stuff. We have regeneration of neurons, of neural cells, which is something that also I'm very interested in. If you're interested in that specifically, you will have to study some molecular biology and cell biology at university. Regeneration of neural cells is the kind of things we can do now are pretty incredible, and in 10 years time they'll be even better. You can see work by Cordero, Reisman, Campbell, many others, people at UCL again, who do great work there. Stem cell regeneration of retinal cells, visual cortical cells. We have neurogenesis in adults in the central nervous system. We can repair spinal cord nerves now. I see Bradbury and Mahon work they've done recently. Very, very promising work. This is this has been done in rodents, and we have the clinical trials now in humans. It's pretty exciting, and diseases, pretty terrible diseases that we're getting closer and closer to curing now through biomolecular techniques, cellular techniques, and techniques from engineering as well, and physical engineering. Yes, I mean, that's how neuroscience is done today. For books, see the previous video. I show the books that I have and references. If you want, these are some references for. Again, please download you can download this PowerPoint file, and yeah, I mean, just copy and paste these references into Google, to any PubMed. These are some important seminal papers in sensory and vision. Let's see, we have Ramachandran, Helmholtz, Bonhoeffer, Tutel, and Wiesel, very important, Baylor, and so on, Schnapp. And in motor physiology, these are some pretty fundamental people you should know about. We have Lemon here, R 1988, Lemon, Worsley, Penfield, Dominstrick at the bottom here, Sherrington. These are important people. So that's it. Next lesson we'll cover histology, then we'll move on to cognition, and then computation. And that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. Hope you found it informational, or educational rather. And please, go through it again if you've missed something, make some notes. If you like and share and comment and subscribe, then that way I know, what that way I can make more videos. And comments in the comment section, any questions you have, if there's any mistakes or any feedback you want to give me, for me personally or for the PowerPoint, please let me know. Any feedback is good. Any questions, as I say, I'll try and answer as best I can. And read the description. There's if you want the full references, then a bit more about myself and my social media, and also again, a copy of this PowerPoint file you can download. So that's pretty much it for this video. This has been a neuroanatomy and neurophysiology, the clinical aspects of that topic, and we've looked at sensory visual systems and motor functions in brief, because it was supposed to be a brief introduction to the main concepts. I hope now you have an idea of the main concepts, and in further sections we'll cover certain topics in more depth, as you can see here. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.